By the time I reached my desk that morning, something in the air already felt wrong. Not the usual Monday morning sluggishness or the stale coffee smell from the break room. This was different. Sharper. Heavier. I could feel it pressing between my shoulder blades the way you sense someone staring at you long before you turn around. Whispers fluttered through the open office like nervous birds. People leaned across cubicle walls, talking behind hands, eyes wide. No one was really working. Screens glowed untouched, keyboards rested under idle fingers. I slid into my chair and opened my laptop, but I didn't type a single word. Instead, I listened. "Did you hear?" Someone murmured near the printers. "He's really coming? Here? I swear to God, the CEO is actually in the building." That made me pause. Richard Harlow, the man whose stiff, overly polished face decorated every quarterly newsletter, never visited our floor. He was a myth more than a human being, a signature on documents, a blurred face in the annual report, a soundbite in all hands meetings that nobody really watched. So why would he come here? To the engineering department? The least glamorous corner of the company? Before I could dig for answers, my manager, Laura, appeared at the end of the aisle. Her posture was rigid, her smile forced so tight it looked painful. "Morning, Emma," she said in a voice 2 octaves too bright. "Could you stay available today?" "No. Unexpected breaks?" That was strange. I usually worked uninterrupted for hours. Nobody tracked my breaks. Nobody cared as long as the system kept running smoothly, the system I had built over 4 years, line by line, algorithm by algorithm. "Sure," I said slowly. "Is something happening?" Her eyes darted toward the far corridor, the one leading to the executive conference rooms. "Just stay close." She walked away before I could ask anything else. The tension only grew. Doors opened and shut. Men in suits who didn't belong on this floor hurried past us. HR clustered like vultures near the elevators. Every now and then, someone peeked over at me and quickly looked away when I met their gaze. That's when I knew it wasn't general chaos. It was about me. I felt it in the way people avoided speaking openly near my desk, how they fell silent when I stood up to get water, how their eyes followed me with a strange mix of pity and fear. Something had been set in motion, something no one wanted to be caught too close to. At 10:17 a.m., the corridor fell painfully silent, the kind of silence that feels orchestrated. A man in a charcoal suit appeared, flanked by 2 HR reps. He looked exactly like his photos, perfectly combed gray hair, expression carved from ice. Richard Harlow in the flesh. He scanned the floor with a level of disdain usually reserved for chewing gum stuck to an expensive shoe. Then his gaze stopped. On me. "You," he said, not raising his voice, yet somehow making everyone around us wince. "Come with us." My pulse thudded once, then steadied. I closed my laptop gently, stood up, and felt dozens of eyes tracking every step I took toward him. People expect panic in moments like this, frantic questions, racing thoughts, but my mind was calm, almost unnervingly clear. If anything, I felt curiosity. Why the theatrics? Why the CEO himself? And why today? The walk down the corridor felt like a procession. The HR pair shadowed us as if I were some kind of threat, which would have been laughable if the atmosphere weren't so suffocating. Richard didn't look back to see if I followed. He simply assumed I would. At the conference room entrance, he paused, opened the door, and motioned me inside with a curt flick of his wrist. I stepped in. The blinds were drawn. The air was cold. A stack of folders sat on the table, and someone had placed a single chair directly across from the CEO's seat, as if they'd staged the room for a public execution. Richard walked around the table, slow, deliberate, savoring the silence. I sat down without being asked. His brow twitched. Apparently he'd expected fear, compliance, something dramatic. Instead, I waited, hands folded, gaze steady. He lowered himself into the chair opposite me, clasped his hands, and for a moment simply stared, studying me like a puzzle piece that refused to fit the way he wanted. "Emma Carter," he said at last. "Yes. You've been with the company 4 years. 4 years and 3 months. His lips tightened. He didn't like being corrected. There it was. Ego, dressed in an expensive suit. Everyone acted like this man was a genius strategist, but all I saw was someone used to unquestioned obedience. Someone who never heard the word no unless it came from a higher shareholder. He leaned back, exhaled slowly, then said the words that sent a ripple of shock through the room, though not through me. "Today," he said, voice flat, emotionless, "will be your last morning here." Before I could respond, before I was even supposed to, the lights flickered and a faint metallic groan echoed through the ventilation system, like the building itself reacting to this statement. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Something was coming, and I already knew this wasn't just another corporate meeting. It was the beginning of a war. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound came from the air conditioner humming somewhere above us. I waited, posture relaxed, expression neutral. I knew better than to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. If this was supposed to intimidate me, he'd badly miscalculated. Richard folded his hands, elbows resting on the table as he leaned forward, eyes locked onto mine with sterile detachment. "You seem unusually calm," he said. "Most people would at least ask why." "Most people," I replied quietly, "have something to lose." A faint crack appeared in his composure, a tightening around the eyes, a twitch of annoyance. "You're taking this very lightly." "I'm taking it realistically," I said. "You summoned me here without explanation. That usually means you've already made your decision." His mouth curved into something like a smile, but without warmth. "You're perceptive." "I write predictive algorithms," I reminded him. "Patterns are my job." He ignored the comment and opened one of the folders in front of him. Papers rustled with exaggerated purpose. I had no idea what he was looking at. Probably printouts from HR meant to justify a decision they didn't truly understand. Then he closed the folder abruptly and straightened. "Let's make this simple." He steepled his fingers. "Emma Carter, as of this moment, your employment with Harlow Dynamics is terminated." I breathed out slowly, not in shock, but in confirmation. This was exactly what I'd expected brewing behind the whispered meetings and locked doors. But hearing it spoken aloud, so bluntly, so coldly, was still a strange experience, like observing your own surgery from above the table. He continued, voice smooth, clinical. "HR has already processed the paperwork. Your severance package is standard. We expect you to return your company assets immediately." "Company assets," I repeated. "Of course." His eyes narrowed slightly at my tone, as if unsure whether I was mocking him. To be fair, I wasn't entirely sure myself. "I assume you'll want to gather your things," he added. "Someone from HR will escort you." "I don't need an escort." "It's protocol," he said curtly. "They can follow protocol," I said, "but it won't change anything." He frowned. "Meaning what exactly?" Instead of answering, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my badge, and set it gently on the table between us. The small plastic rectangle landed with a soft tap, absurdly quiet given the gravity of the moment. He seemed pleased by that, my compliance, my quietness. It probably felt like victory. "Good," he said. "Then we're finished here." But we weren't. He reached for the badge as if the conversation were over, as if everything had been neatly wrapped and filed away, as if people like me were interchangeable gears in his machine. And maybe everyone else was, but not me. Not this time. Just as his fingers touched the badge, I spoke. Calm even, but sharp enough to cut the air between us. "All right," I said. "Then explain to the investors why their sales will drop by 80% once my software stops running. You have exactly 30 minutes. His hand froze above the table. He didn't look up. Not yet. His mind was still processing the sentence, parsing the logic, searching for the hidden thread he must have missed. Only when he found none did he slowly raise his eyes to mine. "What did you say?" His voice was much quieter now, almost cautious. I repeated the words, just as steady as before. "Your sales. 80%. Gone. The moment my software stops." A heavy silence settled between us. Not the cold corporate silence from earlier. This one was alive, electric, pulsing with unspoken panic. "No one else has access to your architecture," he said stiffly. "Correct. We have your documentation." "You have a diagram," I corrected. "A very pretty, very useless diagram drawn after the last major update. It hasn't been accurate in months." His jaw tightened. "And your team doesn't know the internal logic," I said. "They only know the API layers, not the underlying engine. You asked for speed, so I built it myself. You rewarded me by cutting the engineering team. Conveniently, you forgot what that meant." His expression darkened. "Are you threatening the company?" "No," I said. "I'm informing you of a technical reality you appear to have overlooked." "You're lying." "If I were lying," I said, "you wouldn't be sweating." A faint sheen glimmered across his forehead. He quickly wiped it with the back of his hand as though that would erase the evidence. For the first time since I'd walked into the room, he looked unsure. He pushed back from the table, the wheels of his chair scraping hard against the floor. "Stay here," he muttered. "Why?" I asked lightly. "I'm fired." He didn't answer. Instead, he stormed out of the conference room so quickly that one of the HR reps nearly stumbled trying to follow him. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving me alone in the artificially chilled silence. I remained seated, calm, silent, unmoving, because now the game had truly begun. They thought they could discard me like a worn-out part, but they forgot one crucial fact. I built the machine, and the machine answers to me. I didn't wait long before the conference room window, the one overlooking the open office, filled with anxious faces. People pretended to be walking by, but their heads craned in the same direction, toward the CEO's office at the end of the hall, where raised voices now leaked through the supposedly soundproof walls. It was almost funny. The man who demanded absolute control was losing it in front of half the company. I stayed in my chair. There was no reason to leave yet. I wanted him to return. I wanted him to hear the rest of what I had to say. The door creaked open at last, and Richard stepped back inside. His face was paler now, his confidence cracked just enough for me to notice. He tried to mask it, but the stiffness in his shoulders betrayed him. He was already afraid. He didn't sit this time. He hovered near the table like he needed the illusion of height. "You're exaggerating," he said abruptly, skipping any greeting. "Your contribution is important, but not irreplaceable." "Yes," I said calmly. "That's what you believe. That's what I know, he snapped. Then you should call the investors, I replied. Tell them everything is under control. That silenced him. He looked down at the table, then at my badge lying neatly where I had placed it. His gaze lingered on it as if it had transformed into an explosive. You're bluffing, he said, but weaker this time. I tilted my head. Am I? He swallowed once. A tiny movement, but for someone like him, someone trained in corporate theatrics, it spoke volumes. I watched, not saying a word, letting the weight of the truth settle onto his shoulders like wet concrete. My software was simple on the surface, an optimization engine for product forecasting, integrated into the company's entire sales infrastructure. But beneath the polished interface lived layers of logic, heuristics, predictive models, and adaptive functions only I understood. Not because I hid them, but because I'd been the only one building for the last 2 years, while upper management slashed engineering budgets. Look, he said, and for the first time his voice wasn't sharp but measured, almost coaxing. Maybe we can come to an arrangement. I raised an eyebrow. I thought I was already fired. His jaw clenched. We can revisit that decision. How thoughtful. He bristled. Don't push me, Emma. You're not in a bargaining position. Really? I asked, leaning back. Because from where I'm sitting, I have something you want, and you can't get it anywhere else. His eyes flashed. You built this system as part of your employment, meaning it belongs to the company. Technically, the concept belongs to the company, I corrected, but the implementation, the actual code, operates under a private license. My license. He blinked, visibly thrown off. That's impossible. You should try reading the agreements you sign, I said. Specifically, the additional clause your legal team approved when I rewrote the platform 2 years ago. He stared at me, and I could practically see him rummaging through his memory, trying to recall anything he'd skimmed in a rush. What clause? He asked quietly. The adaptive learning module, I said. It wasn't part of the original system, so I included a license arrangement. You approved it. That was a minor add-on. No, I interrupted softly. It became the core engine, and you never revoked my rights to it. His nostrils flared. A bead of sweat rolled down the side of his face. He wiped it away quickly, pretending he hadn't. This is ridiculous, he muttered, but I could hear the shake in his voice. You can't hold a company hostage. I'm not holding anything, I said. I'm simply walking away with what's legally mine. His voice cracked. And without it? Your sales plummet, I finished. 80%, overnight. He sank into the chair across from me as if his knees finally gave out. For a brief moment, he didn't look like the CEO plastered across corporate posters. He looked like a man who had just realized he'd stepped off a cliff and only now noticed the drop below. Then he looked up at me, truly looked, and something shifted behind his eyes. A flicker of resentment, of desperation, of calculation. Fine, he said. Name your price. I let the silence stretch long enough for him to squirm. Then I spoke, slow and deliberate. You fired me, I said. You made it official. You can't just reverse that without raising questions. Questions can be managed. Not these. I stood up, smoothing my jacket sleeves. You fired the architect of your core system without cause. Investors will want to know why. His face tightened. Don't do this. Do what? I asked. Tell the truth? For a moment, we simply stared at each other across the table. A dethroned king clinging to his crown, and a queen who had never needed one. Then I stepped toward the door. You have 28 minutes left, I said softly. Call whoever you need. I didn't wait for his reply. I walked out, passing the HR team waiting nervously outside. They parted like water around me, whispering, eyes wide with a mix of confusion and awe. I felt none of it. No fear, no anger, only clarity, sharp and cold. If he wanted a war, I would give him one, and I would win. The moment I stepped back into the hallway, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't the slow building tension from earlier. This was sharper, frantic. The kind of panic that spreads when people realize something is spiraling out of control, and no one knows how to stop it. I walked past clusters of employees pretending not to stare. Their eyes tracked me anyway, following every step like I had transformed into some rare, dangerous specimen on display. No one spoke to me. No one dared. But they felt the tremor running through the building, and they knew it was connected to me. Halfway to my desk, a sudden burst of shouting erupted from the CEO's office. Richard. His voice was unmistakable, deep, authoritative, now stripped of calm and soaked in desperation. "Find the documentation, all of it. I want every version she ever touched, now!" I paused near the corner, out of view, not hiding, just observing. His door was half open, and the scene unfolding inside reminded me of a battlefield. Department heads rushed in and out like panicked messengers. The engineering director, Michael, looked like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over his head. He clutched a stack of printouts, flipping through them with trembling fingers. "This is everything we have," he stammered. "But without Emma..." Richard cut him off. "I didn't ask who we don't have. I asked what we do have." Michael swallowed hard. "Mostly diagrams, old commit logs, partial notes. The adaptive engine documentation is incomplete." "Incomplete?" Richard barked. "How incomplete?" Michael hesitated, and even from a distance I could see the dread spreading across his face. "Completely incomplete," he admitted. "No one on the team ever worked directly with the core module. She always said it was too unstable to expose." Richard slammed his hand on the desk so hard the pens jumped. "Unacceptable." Michael flinched like he'd been struck. From further inside the room, I saw heads of sales, IT, and operations all jammed into the space, trying not to look as terrified as they were. Someone whispered, "This is a disaster," under their breath. Another muttered, "She warned them. I heard her tell management last month." The tension inside that office felt alive. A storm. No, a collapse. And Richard was in the center of it, drowning. He stalked to the window and spun back, his voice rising again. "We need to contain this. We can fix it. We just need access to the architecture." "We don't have it," Michael said. "Then reconstruct it," Richard shouted. "We can't. Not in weeks. Maybe months," Michael corrected. "The system learns and rewrites parts of itself. Without her master key..." "Key?" Richard repeated sharply. "There's a key?" Michael's eyes widened with immediate regret. I meant encryption keys for the environment. Not literal. I want everything related to those keys," Richard snapped. "Every copy, every file, every permission record. If she left anything behind, we find it." I had to bite back a smile. I hadn't left anything behind. He knew it too. That's why he was spiraling. Just then, HR Director Stella hurried into the room, clutching a phone. "They want an update," she said breathlessly. Richard's face stiffened. "Who?" She didn't answer immediately, just extended the phone toward him with trembling hands. "The investors." A silence dropped over the room like a stone. Everyone froze. Even from the hallway, I felt the chill. Investors didn't call unannounced. Investors didn't demand updates unless something massive was happening. And investor calls almost always spelled trouble, Not for the company, but for the person in charge. Richard took the phone with a hand that wasn't entirely steady. "Harlow speaking," he said, forcing his voice into something approaching confidence. I couldn't hear the voice on the other end, but whatever he was told drained the color from his face. "Yes," he said after a moment. "I'm aware of the situation. We're addressing it." More muffled words came through the speaker. The investors were not pleased. "No, I assure you," Richard sputtered. "Everything is under control." It wasn't. Everyone in that office knew it wasn't. I leaned against the wall, listening, heart steady. I wasn't here out of vengeance or arrogance. I wasn't here to revel in chaos. I was here because the truth was finally catching up to him. "You will have explanations shortly," Richard said, each word clipped and brittle. "I'll call you back." He ended the call and lowered the phone slowly, as if afraid it might explode in his hand. "Everyone out," he said, voice strangled, "except IT." Department heads scattered instantly, their shoes skidding on the polished floor. No one looked back at him or at me. They didn't want to be caught in crossfire. The remaining engineers huddled nervously in the corner, waiting for orders. Richard pointed at them like a man issuing commands from a sinking ship. "Patch this system now." "We're trying," one of them whispered. "But without Emma—" I stepped into the doorway. Every head in the room snapped toward me. Richard froze mid-sentence, his mouth half open, his eyes widening with something close to fear. The engineers looked like they were witnessing the arrival of a ghost. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My presence alone was enough to make the entire room fall silent. Richard swallowed hard. "What are you doing here?" I shrugged. "You told me to stay in the building. Protocol, wasn't it?" His jaw clenched. He hated that I wasn't afraid. He hated even more that everyone could see he was. The engineers glanced between us like spectators at a duel, instinctively knowing which one of us held the real weapon. And it wasn't him. Richard straightened, trying to collect what little dignity he had left. "We are handling the situation." I nodded slightly. "I can see that." My calmness only enraged him further. Then I said the sentence that made half the room suck in a breath. "You've lost your system, Richard. The only question now is whether you lose your company, too." For the first time, he didn't respond. He couldn't, because he knew I was right, and the clock was still ticking. I checked the time on my phone as I stepped away from the doorway. 20 minutes left. 20 minutes until my system would begin its timed fallback shutdown, the one designed to protect the core algorithm when unauthorized administrators attempted to override it. I'd built it precisely for moments like this. Not sabotage, not malice, just defense. A safeguard against incompetence disguised as authority. And now incompetence was running the company. I walked toward the elevator, not hurried, not nervous. Behind me, I heard Richard barking more orders, useless ones, frantic ones, like he thought volume and desperation could replace logic. They never could, especially not with code. The elevator doors slid open, and I stepped inside. As they closed, sealing me off from the chaos on the executive floor, a strange stillness washed over me. Not relief, not triumph. Clarity. The moment the doors parted on the ground floor, I understood just how deep the panic had spread. 2 security guards exchanged alarmed glances when they saw me, but neither dared approach. HR was clustered near the reception desk, eyes darting from their tablets to their buzzing phones. My name was on every screen. I didn't need to see the text to know why. I kept walking. "Emma!" someone called behind me. HR. I ignored them. They didn't matter. My badge was already surrendered. I was no longer an employee. I didn't owe them anything, not time, not explanations, not comfort. The automatic doors opened, and cool outside air hit my face as I stepped onto the company's front plaza. Sunlight glinted off the glass windows towering overhead. Somewhere inside that building, alarms, not literal ones, but corporate ones, were ringing. I walked down the steps and headed toward the street. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Unknown number. Then a text message. Richard Harlow. Pick up. Now. I almost laughed. How quickly a tone can change when someone realizes their power was an illusion all along. I kept walking. Another buzz. Another. Then another. By the time I reached the corner, the screen lit up with a list of missed calls. Richard, HR Engineering Director, IT leads, even a number I recognized as the Internal Legal Department. I silenced the device. Not off, just quiet. Let them panic. Traffic rolled by, loud and indifferent. For the first time in hours, I became aware of the simple rhythm of the city around me. The sound of tires on asphalt, the murmur of conversations, a dog barking somewhere nearby. Normal life, unaffected, peaceful. My system, on the other hand, was counting down. I turned down a side street and headed toward the cafe where I sometimes worked when the office became too suffocating. My feet moved slowly, unhurried, as if I had all the time in the world, which I did. They were the ones running out. When I reached the cafe's outdoor tables, I sat down and opened my laptop. Not to work, just to check the real-time monitoring dashboard I still had access to because my personal environment lived outside the company's control. The platform's heartbeat pulsed across the screen, active, stable, integrated. For now. A soft chime indicated a system alert triggered at headquarters. I watched the logs flicker. Unauthorized access attempt detected. Rollback protocol engaged. Failsafe timer, 14 minutes. I nodded to myself. Right on schedule. My phone vibrated again. Michael, Engineering Director. Emma, please. We need to talk. This is serious. He wasn't wrong, but not for the reasons he thought. The next message arrived almost instantly. You don't have to come back. Just help us stabilize the engine. Richard is losing it. I sipped my coffee. The city moved around me, oblivious, uncomplicated. Another message popped up. Please. The investors are calling every 5 minutes. Then the calls resumed, back to back, relentless. Richard never called twice when he was in control. The 7th missed call from him told me all I needed to know. He was scared. The cafe owner passed by, dropping a napkin on my table. Long day already? She asked cheerfully. I smiled. You have no idea. When she walked away, I glanced back down at the dashboard. Failsafe timer, 10 minutes. System load increasing. Unstable patches detected. Pending collapse, 79% probability. Right on track. My phone buzzed again, this time with a different tone. A voicemail transcription appeared from Richard Harlow. Emma, listen to me. I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is unacceptable. You're jeopardizing millions in revenue. You're jeopardizing your own career. I'm giving you one chance, one, to come back inside and fix this. If you don't... The transcript cut off. Another message followed immediately, shorter, stripped of arrogance. Come back. Please. There it was. Not a command, a request, something he didn't know how to make until fear taught him. I closed the voicemail, lifted my cup again, and leaned back in my chair. The sun warmed my face, and the sound of laughter drifted from a nearby table. A world away from the imploding tower behind me. My system kept ticking. 7 minutes. I drummed my fingers lightly on the table. They weren't calling because they needed an engineer. They were calling because they needed me. And finally, they understood what that meant. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vindictive. I was simply done being invisible. My laptop pinged again. Failsafe timer, 6 minutes. Critical state approaching. Attempted patch rejected. The phone buzzed once more. 15 missed calls. I exhaled slowly, calmly. The storm wasn't mine anymore. It was theirs. And the clock kept ticking. At 5 minutes, the failsafe alert turned red. My laptop screen pulsed with warning messages, each one more urgent than the last. My code was doing exactly what it was designed to do, protect itself from intrusive, panicked hands. But the true source of the chaos wasn't the software. It was the people trying to force it back under control. My phone vibrated again. This time, it wasn't Richard. It wasn't HR. It wasn't even Michael. The name flashing on my screen froze me mid-sip. Investor Relations, Secure Line. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. They never called employees directly. Not even senior leadership. Certainly not. Fired engineers sipping coffee at a street cafe. When it finally stopped ringing, a text followed immediately. Ms. Carter, this is Investor Relations. We urgently require a status update on your system. Please respond. My system. They phrased it correctly. At least someone understood. A second message arrived before I could lock the screen. CEO Harlow has informed us of technical complications. Our representatives are en route to headquarters. ETA. 30 minutes. I closed my eyes for a moment and breathed in slowly. Richard thought he was dealing with an employee. The investors knew they were dealing with an asset. A very different equation. I opened the dashboard again. The warnings had intensified. Failsafe timer, 412 unauthorized override attempts, 17 critical dependency collapse, 92% probable load deviation, catastrophic. I pictured the office I'd just left, the hive of frantic voices, the clack of keyboards as engineers scrambled to patch holes they didn't understand. None of them had ever touched the adaptive core. Richard had kept the team understaffed to save costs, counting on me to quietly hold everything together. And now that quiet had ended. My phone buzzed. Another text, this time from Michael. Investors just called the floor directly. They're furious. Richard is blaming rogue code. Please tell me you're coming back. Rogue code. So that was the story he was spinning. I typed a response, then deleted it. He wasn't the enemy, but he wasn't innocent either. He'd known how they pushed me, how they ignored every warning I gave. Silence had been his safety. Now silence was drowning him too. My coffee was nearly gone. I set the cup down and watched the swirl of foam at the bottom, calm, controlled. While inside that skyscraper, everything trembled. A call came in. No caller ID, encrypted line, investor level. I let it go to voicemail. Seconds later, the transcript appeared. Ms. Carter, this is lead partner Grant. We were informed of your departure. We need clarity on the system stability before arrival. This is not optional. Then another. We will be expecting you at headquarters within the hour. Do not ignore this message. The shift was unmistakable. They weren't demanding compliance. They were summoning leverage. Because they already suspected the truth, the company's success was built on something only I could fully operate. I closed my laptop and leaned back. The city buzzed around me. Cars honked. Someone laughed loudly from the sidewalk. A delivery bike zipped past, nearly brushing my knee. Life continued effortlessly, unaware that a corporation worth billions was slowly spiraling into free fall a few blocks away. My phone buzzed again. A video message. That was new. I hesitated, then opened it. Richard filled the screen. His tie was loosened, his face almost chalk white. His voice wavered between anger and desperation. "Emma, investors are coming. They want answers I can't give them. This situation has escalated far beyond you or me. I need you back in the building, immediately." Then, after a shaky breath, "Please." He ended the recording abruptly, as if the word had burned his tongue. I watched it twice, not because it moved me, but because I needed to be absolutely certain I'd seen the crack in his armor. The moment where power slipped from his grasp and he realized exactly who held it now. I placed my phone on the table, face down, and let the world remain quiet. Failsafe timer. 2009. System entering self-isolation mode. Company services. Degraded projected sales impact. Catastrophic. My creation was doing what it was designed to do. Refuse corruption. I checked my watch. The investors were likely already in the air or speeding through traffic. And when they arrived, they would find not a technical outage, not a failed engineer, but the consequences of a CEO who had no idea what he was destroying. A faint drizzle began to fall, a light, cool sprinkle that speckled the table and sidewalk. The scent of rain seeped through the air, softening the edges of the city noise. I pulled up my hood and stood. For a moment, I simply stood there, watching droplets gather on my laptop case, listening to the muted rustle of tires on wet pavement. They were waiting for me. Not because they valued me, not because they respected me, but because they had no choice. My system had outgrown them, and they knew it. Richard knew it. I started walking, not fast, not slow, just steady, toward the building where panic was now a language spoken fluently on every floor, toward the investors who were searching for answers, toward the final unraveling of a man who thought he could erase me. Time left. 1:24, and counting. By the time I reached the end of the block, the drizzle had thickened into a steady curtain of rain. It tapped against my hood and blurred the lights around me, turning the city into a smear of motion and noise. My steps left dark footprints on the pavement, each one dissolving seconds later. Temporary, fleeting. Unlike the chaos behind me. My phone buzzed again, twice, 3 times, vibrating so hard it felt alive in my pocket. I didn't check it. I already knew what it would say. More calls, more voicemails, more urgent demands from a building finally feeling the consequences of its own arrogance. But then a different tone sounded, a soft ping I'd set only for direct system alerts. I pulled out my phone and opened the notification. Failsafe timer, 0058 isolation level, maximum external access, severed system stability, declining under forced intervention. They were fighting it, hard. They didn't understand that every attempt to force the engine back online only accelerated its shutdown. The system wasn't collapsing, it was protecting itself. 58 seconds. I slowed my pace, stopping under the small awning of a closed flower shop. The scent of wet soil drifted from the pots beside me, grounding me in a way the office never could. Another message appeared on my phone, this time a text. A single, desperate line. "Please respond. We can fix this. Just tell me what you want." It wasn't signed, but it didn't have to be. Richard. I stared at the message for a long moment. Not because I was considering responding, but because of the word choice. Please, tell me what you want. The tone of a man bargaining with a force he finally realized he could not control. I locked the phone. The rain softened for a moment, then picked up again in delicate sheets. Cars hissed along the road, Umbrellas bloomed like dark flowers. A child splashed in a puddle while her mother groaned in exhaustion. Life kept happening, beautifully indifferent. I stepped out from the awning and continued walking. When my phone buzzed again, I almost didn't check it. But something about the vibration felt different, lighter, almost hesitant. I glanced at the screen. A new message. 5 words. Come back. We can discuss terms. I stopped walking. Terms. It was the first time anyone from that company had acknowledged that I wasn't just an expendable engineer, that I had leverage, power, value beyond the lines of code they exploited and ignored. My thumb hovered above the screen. Before I could decide what to do, another message popped up. This one shorter, raw, unmasked. Please. The rain drowned out the rest of the world for a moment. Every sound softened, leaving only my breath and the glow of the message staring back at me. I could imagine exactly where Richard was sending it from. Hunched in his office, tie undone, sweat pooling at his temples, frantic executives circling like nervous animals, investors minutes away, systems deteriorating, his empire cracking open along the fault line he had carved himself. He wasn't asking out of respect. He was asking because he had finally understood the truth he'd ignored for years. You cannot build a kingdom on someone else's foundation and expect it to stand if you tear down the builder. The fail-safe timer hit 0. My phone vibrated once, sharply. Adaptive engine. Offline sales infrastructure. Disconnected service stability. 11% projected revenue. Impact. Immediate. The collapse wouldn't be permanent. I had designed the system to protect itself, not destroy the company. But the outage would be visible enough, costly enough, humiliating enough that the investors would demand answers. And answers always expose the liars first. For several long seconds, I simply watched the raindrops trail down my screen. Then finally, I typed back. Just 3 words. I'm listening. I didn't send it out of mercy, or anger, or triumph. I sent it because it was the truth. I was listening, for the first time, on my own terms. The reply came almost instantly. Come back to the lobby. I'll meet you. Please hurry. Something tightened in my chest. Not fear, not reluctance, but an old, familiar sensation. The awareness that a moment you can't undo is cresting over you. I closed my hood tighter around my face and turned back toward headquarters. Rain ran down my sleeves. My hair stuck to my cheeks. My footsteps splashed through shallow puddles. But my mind was steady, clear, focused. This wasn't about revenge or vindication. It was about reclaiming something I'd given away too easily for years without realizing it. My worth. As the building came into view, towering and glassy and trembling under its own weight, I paused at the curb. A black car was pulling up. Sleek, expensive, investor grade. Voices rose inside the lobby. People rushed to the doors. I wiped the rain from my face and stepped forward. Not as a fired employee, not as a threat, but as the person the entire building was finally, desperately, counting on. The person they never expected to need so badly. And the only one with the power to decide whether they would rise again or fall. By the time I stepped into the lobby, the place was unrecognizable. The usual polished calm had cracked open, replaced by frantic whispers, thudding footsteps, and faces stretched tight with fear. People who never acknowledged my existence before now watched me like I was walking out of a burning building instead of into one. A receptionist gasped when she saw me. Someone from legal stood frozen mid-sentence. Security straightened, unsure whether they should stop me or salute me. I didn't break stride. Richard was already there, pacing near the seating area, his hair damp with sweat, suit rumpled as though he'd been wrestling with the walls. When he saw me, he exhaled so hard it looked painful. "Emma," he said, stepping forward too quickly. "Thank you for—" I lifted a hand. "Don't thank me. You asked me to return. I'm here to hear what you have to say." His mouth closed around whatever desperate gratitude he'd been about to spill. He nodded stiffly and swallowed. "You should know," he began, lowering his voice. "The investors arrived early. They're upstairs. They're extremely tense. They want a direct explanation from you." "Direct," I repeated. "To me. Yes." He rubbed his forehead and looked away. "They didn't want my summary of the situation. They insisted." I felt a subtle shift inside me. Not satisfaction exactly, but recognition that the balance had finally tilted. It wasn't just about my system anymore. The investors wanted truth, not filtered reports through the man who caused the disaster. A small group of executives gathered near the elevator, whispering furiously. When they saw me walking toward them, their conversation died instantly. Some of them looked at me with fear, others with relief, a few with the cold calculation of people already rewriting corporate history in their heads. But none of them tried to stop me. The elevator doors opened, and Richard gestured for me to enter. I stepped inside. He followed hesitantly, as though afraid I might change my mind mid-ascent and vanish. As the doors closed, he cleared his throat. "Look, whatever happens in there, I hope you'll remember we've worked together for a long time." 4 years, I said, "and 3 months. He flinched at the correction. "Right. That." The elevator hummed upward. The numbers blinked past slowly. Too slowly for him, probably, but for me, it felt like a countdown, not to failure, but to clarity. When we stepped out onto the executive floor, the tension thickened like fog. Assistants hovered with clipboards, phones glued to their ears. The CFO was pacing near a window. The head of HR clutched a folder to her chest like a life jacket. And in the conference room at the end of the hall, behind the glass walls, 3 people sat on a video call projected across a full panel screen. Investors, watching, waiting. The moment I entered the room, they turned their attention toward me with an intensity that made the air shift. "Ms. Carter," the lead investor said, nodding sharply, "we appreciate you joining us." Richard hovered near the door like a guilty child summoned to the principal's office. "I told her we are speaking to her," the investor cut in, without looking at him. Richard's jaw tightened. He stepped back. I walked to the center of the room. I didn't sit yet. I'd sit when I decided the moment was mine, not theirs. "Ms. Carter," another investor said, "we were informed you no longer work for the company." "That is correct," I replied. "And yet the system you built appears to be inaccessible." "Also correct." Richard winced. The lead investor leaned forward, fingers steepled. "We want to understand precisely what your system is doing, why it is down, and what actions were taken to cause this instability." I glanced at Richard. His face had gone from pale to nearly translucent. "My system," I said, articulating each word clearly, "has an adaptive failsafe designed to protect itself from unauthorized manipulation." "Unauthorized?" the investor repeated. "Who attempted to override it?" I didn't answer. Instead, I looked directly at Richard. So did the investors. He froze. I tried to initiate a patch," he stammered. "Just standard procedure." "It wasn't standard," I said. "You attempted to rewrite parts of the architecture without the required permissions. Naturally, the system interpreted this as a hostile intrusion." Richard's lips parted in shock. Hostile! Emma, I was trying to fix— You fired the person who maintains the system, I said. That's not fixing. One of the investors exhaled sharply, a sound of pure disbelief. Richard, is this accurate? Richard tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. It wasn't supposed to. There were reasons. They didn't want excuses. They wanted competence, and he had none left to offer. I finally took my seat, folding my hands on the table. The system is stable, I said. It's simply locked. I can restore it fully, quickly. Richard breathed out, visibly relieved. The investors did not look relieved. They looked interested. What do you require? The lead investor asked. Not what will you do? Not can you fix it? What do you require? This was the moment Richard understood he was no longer part of the equation. I inhaled slowly, deliberately. Before we discuss recovery, I need one thing clearly established. The system operates under my license, my architecture, my protocols. The investors nodded. Richard stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Good, I said softly. Then let's continue. I explained calmly, not boastfully, not dramatically, how the adaptive engine worked, what triggered the failsafe, how the internal logic evolved, why the system couldn't simply be replicated or patched by people who didn't understand the underlying structure. Every word I spoke cut a little deeper into the crumbling foundation beneath Richard's feet. The investors listened intently. Richard wilted further. When I finished, the lead investor sat back. Thank you, Ms. Carter. That was extremely clear. Richard opened his mouth, probably to reclaim some illusion of control. He never got the chance. Mr. Harlow, the investor said, tone turning glacial, we will speak with you privately after this meeting. The kind of sentence that ends careers. I glanced at Richard. His shoulders sagged. His eyes flicked toward me with something between resentment and regret, but mostly fear. I stood. The system can be restored, I said, but only under agreed conditions. The investors nodded. Richard didn't, but his agreement was no longer needed. I didn't walk back into this company to beg. I walked in because they finally understood the truth. The system listened to me, and now, so did they. Silence pooled across the conference room after I finished speaking. Not the uncomfortable kind, not even the stunned kind, but the kind that comes when people realize the ground beneath them has shifted, permanently, and they're deciding whether to stand still or move with it. The investors exchanged glances across the screens. Richard watched them, chest tight, jaw clenched, trying to read their expressions the way gamblers study cards. He already knew he'd lost. The only question left was how publicly it would happen. The lead investor folded his hands. Ms. Carter, he said, voice steady and precise, you have made your position clear. Now we would like you to clarify your needs. My needs, not my requests, not my demands, my needs. The distinction was subtle, but powerful, and Richard heard it. His shoulders stiffened. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. I didn't answer right away. I took my time because for once, I had it. I leaned back in the chair, fingers resting lightly on the table. When I built the system, I began, I built it under constraints that were unrealistic. The investors nodded slightly. They all knew about Richard's infamous cost-cutting. I maintained the adaptive engine alone because I wasn't given the team I asked for. I worked through nights and weekends because deadlines were set without considering what the system actually required. I repeatedly warned leadership that the architecture needed proper support. I paused, letting the words wash over the room. And each time, I continued, those concerns were ignored. One of the investors exhaled sharply. Another scribbled something on a digital tablet. Richard shifted in his seat like his skin was suddenly too tight. "So," the lead investor said, "what do you need in order to restore the system and ensure long-term stability?" The phrasing was clean, respectful, almost deferential. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. That wasn't the point. I simply said, "I need authority." Richard's head snapped toward me. "Authority? Over what?" I turned to him slowly. "Over the project I built." His mouth opened, then closed again. Nothing came out. I continued, addressing the investors. "I want full development autonomy, a dedicated team under my direction, hiring power, budget oversight, and all changes to the architecture must go through me." Richard sputtered. That's absurd. You're asking to run an entire—" The lead investor cut him off sharply. "We're not asking your opinion, Richard." He flinched. I kept going. "I also want a contract that reflects the value of the system. Profit share, not just salary." A quiet gasp came from the hallway. Someone must have been listening in. Richard's eyes widened as if I had just asked for his lungs. "Profit share?" he repeated, voice cracking. "You can't be serious. That's a reasonable expectation," the investor interrupted again. "Given that the company's recent growth directly stems from her work." Richard's face reddened. "She's holding the company hostage." "No," the investor corrected calmly. "You fired the person responsible for your revenue engine without understanding what she built. That is why we're here." Every person in the room felt the shift. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't gentle. It was a clean, corporate execution. The kind that doesn't involve shouting, just precise, cold sentences that dismantle a man's authority in under a minute. Richard took a shaky breath. "You can't give her that level of control. It's reckless. It's dangerous." I tilted my head. "Dangerous?" "Richard, the only danger came from your attempt to override a system you didn't understand." He stared at me with a mix of fury and disbelief, as if he still couldn't grasp how everything had unraveled so quickly. The lead investor spoke again, this time with finality. "Ms. Carter's system is the primary driver of our current market advantage. We need it functional. We need it secure, and that means we need her." Richard stepped forward, desperation leaking through his voice. "You can't seriously be considering—" "We are," the investor said simply. He tried again. "You're letting her dictate terms." "She earned the right to dictate terms," the investor replied. I remained calm, hands folded, watching the last remnants of Richard's authority disintegrate like ash in water. The investors turned back to me. "We agree," the lead partner said. "You will have your team, your autonomy, and your profit share, effective immediately." Richard let out a small broken sound, somewhere between disbelief and a suppressed shout. "And," the investor added, "until further notice, you will report directly to the board, not to the CEO." It happened fast, faster than even I expected. Richard stepped forward, face twisted. "This is outrageous. You can't strip my—" "Please step outside, Mr. Harlow," the investor said in a tone that could freeze molten steel. He didn't move. "Now." A security guard appeared at the door. Not aggressively, just present. Richard stared at him, then at me. His eyes were full of something bitter and jagged, humiliation wrapped in a thin shell of rage. But he left. He had no choice. When the door closed behind him, the room felt instantly lighter. The investors refocused on me. "Ms. Carter," the lead investor said, "can you restore the system today?" "Yes," I replied. "Good." Then let's finalize your new terms. New terms? New rules. My rules. I nodded once, feeling the weight of the moment settle into my bones. Not heavy, but grounding. For the first time in years, I wasn't fighting to justify my position. I was defining it. I stood, ready to begin. Power wasn't given to me. I had taken it. And they had finally realized that without me, their empire wasn't an empire at all. When the conference room door shut behind Richard, a strange stillness settled over the space. Not the tense, suffocating kind from earlier, but a quiet equilibrium. A balance finally restored. The air no longer vibrated with panic or ego. It simply was, open and waiting. The investors remained silent for a moment, watching me as if assessing a new element in their universe. And maybe they were. I wasn't the same person who had walked into the building that morning. Something had broken open, not fractured, not shattered, but released. The lead investor finally spoke. Ms. Carter, we'll have legal draft a new contract reflecting everything you outlined. For now, your authority begins immediately. I nodded slowly. Understood. Your conditions are reasonable, another added. Frankly, overdue. That word, overdue, struck deeper than they knew. For years, I had handed over my intellect, my creativity, my time, my energy, quietly, reliably. I never asked for recognition. I never demanded compensation equal to the value I created. I simply trusted that good work would be rewarded. But corporations don't reward goodness. They reward leverage. And I finally had mine. I turned toward the glass wall. Outside, the executive floor buzzed with nervous motion. Employees whispered urgently, their eyes flitting to the conference door every few seconds. They were waiting for a verdict. They had no idea the verdict had already been sealed. The lead investor spoke again. Can you restore the system? Yes, but I won't do it alone anymore. Of course, he said. Build your team. Choose who you want. We'll support the new structure. The phrase lingered, new structure, not a redistribution, a replacement. I drew a steady breath. Then let's restore the platform. The investors ended the call, their faces dissolving into the blank glass panes. The room fell silent once more. At last, I walked toward the door. When I stepped out, all conversation stopped. Every pair of eyes turned toward me, then toward the empty space where Richard had stood earlier. A few of the executives approached quickly. Emma, are things... What did the board say? Is the system... Can you fix it? Their questions tumbled over one another, frantic, grasping. I held up a hand and they quieted instantly. Prepare the engineering war room, I said. I'll need full access, and I'll need a list of senior developers willing to transition under my direction. For a moment, no one moved, stunned, unsure if I actually had the authority to give orders. Then the CFO spoke, voice low. We'll arrange it immediately. It was the first time she had ever addressed me with respect. Genuine respect, not politeness. She hurried away, heels clicking down the hallway. HR approached next, stiff and flustered. Emma, your files, your badge. Should we begin reinstatement paperwork or... You'll receive instructions from the investors shortly, I said, walking past her. My role has changed. Behind me, I heard a sharp breath. Surprise, maybe admiration. The elevator doors opened before I reached out. Someone must have hit the button in anticipation. I stepped inside, descending to the floor that had once felt like a cage. When the doors opened, engineering erupted. Not in sound, but in movement. People surged around me, their voices overlapping. We saw the crash logs. Is the adaptive engine salvageable? Did you really get fired? Is it true the investors? War room, I repeated calmly. Now. They didn't question it. They followed. Inside the dimly lit operations hub, screens flashed with red warnings, error messages piling up faster than anyone could read them. The room smelled of burnt coffee and stress. Normally, this place would feel like chaos. But for me, chaos was an old friend. I stepped up to the central console, slid into the seat, and pulled the keyboard toward me. For several seconds, I stared at the code cascading across the monitors, my code, and felt something warm unfurl in my chest. Not pride, not nostalgia, ownership. All right, I said softly. Let's bring her back. I began typing. Lines of command streamed into the system, bypassing temporary locks, rewriting corrupted processes, guiding the adaptive engine out of its defensive posture. Around me, engineers watched the way one might watch a surgeon perform an impossible operation. 10 minutes passed, then 15, then stability, 42%, 71%, 89%. The screens flickered from red to amber, then at last to green. A collective breath released behind me. Someone whispered, "She did it." Another murmured, "We're saved." But I wasn't listening to them. I was listening to the quiet hum of the architecture resettling, stabilizing, returning to life after being mishandled by people who thought power came from titles. I pressed one final key. The engine thrummed. Green light solidified. The system was back. I leaned back in the chair, letting the moment settle. Engineers crowded behind me, waiting for instruction. I stood slowly and turned toward them. "There are new rules," I said. "The system will evolve. So will this team. If you're willing to work with me, collaboratively, transparently, then I'll make sure every one of you is given the tools and support leadership denied you." Their eyes widened, not with fear, with something like hope. "And if not," I added gently, "that's fine too. But this project is changing direction, starting today." One by one, they nodded. When I left the war room, the hallway was quiet. People watched me pass, not with suspicion or pity, but something else entirely. Recognition. I reached the elevator again, and just before the doors closed, the CFO hurried up. "It's done," she said breathlessly. "Richard has been removed from his position." I held her gaze. "Effective immediately?" "Yes, effective immediately." I nodded once. No smile, no reaction. "Good. Then we can move forward." As the elevator descended, I caught my reflection in the steel panel. Rain-damp hair, steady eyes, posture relaxed but unyielding. Not the same woman who had walked in that morning. When the doors opened onto the lobby, sunlight streamed through the glass as the rain finally broke. I stepped out into the bright open air. Not as a fired employee, not as a threat, but as the new architect of the company's future, on my terms, under my rules, with my power finally, rightfully, in my hands. The storm had passed, and I wasn't going back to the shadows ever again.